Welcome to the live weekly update. It's March 4th, 2026, and I'm excited to share and about what's been going on this week. Well, past 2 weeks because I missed last week. I think it's weird being in this space right now because in terms of current events and the world in general, I'm not closed off from what's going on. And I have said in recent weeks that I think it's important for us to note explicitly like the happenings that are going on in the world. And right now, some pretty big stuff has been going on in the past couple of weeks. And the US and Israel bombing Iran is a pretty huge development. And I just have to acknowledge that, like, maybe other people feel this way too, but in the midst of terrible things happening and that happening at such a high, like, geopolitical level, sometimes it feels a little bit odd to talk about what feels so small and local, even interpersonal or intrapersonal. But I have to just lean into that right now at this moment because one of the things that I feel is so necessary for us to be, like, really attuned to is what we can do in light of what's happening. And when the problems and the world feel so big, one of the key things that has been so resonant for me is to focus on what you can do. So I will admit that, like, there have been many times all the time when I'm also wondering, like, what am I doing? And as much as I said recently that I wasn't going to keep processing on these videos, I think I'm probably going to, because at least today, because there's a lot that I would like to share about what has actually been going on for the past couple of weeks from a personal perspective. And I feel like that's actually necessary to stay true to my intentions with the project of updates, documenting my own process, processing the process, and sharing what you learn, but also to develop an epistemology of intimacy. Like, there is an intention here, and part of it is metaphilosophical performance art, if you will, or just like living a philosophical life and trying to share that. So there are many other things always going on in the world. But I wanted to just acknowledge that in the larger context of things happening, people are stressed and worried. And then there's the part about, like, but when you just keep going day after day, how do you situate yourself in that reality? Um, so I I think that honestly my biggest, like, one of the only things I can really offer in that is that, like, no matter what it is that you're doing, always do it in the context of the larger world and be responsive, but not to be reactive to what's happening in the world, to stay responsive and aligned with the values and the visions that we want, which is really about, like, being able to be the people we need and make the changes within ourselves and our relationships and our communities and the spheres of influence that we have to facilitate and cultivate different bubbles, realms of possibility, and really invest as much as we can into that space to make it different. That is a way to materialize, like, make real something different. Um, and so that's the majority of how I've approached most of my work for many, many years. To be in the space of making something real by creating the conditions, even if that's in a limited capacity or within a relatively small local sphere. So today, in light of all that, the things that I kind of want to talk about are, I want to revisit the idea of this radical first and romancing the revolution, because last Sunday, was the first of the gatherings for romancing the revolution, which is sort of the next evolution from the experience of liberation as local. And I have to be really honest about it that, like, I've been in a space of really wondering how this is going to go and what it looks like and trying to stay clear. I think I'm naming that because I have articulated before how much I know that what I'm trying to do is different from what is sort of promoted or suggested by the people who do stuff. um, Namely in an online digital space, or in terms of building a business, or even in many ways in terms of organizing. So, like, when I acknowledge all the things that are like prescribed, tried and true recipes for how to move and act and gather people, um, I don't deny any of that. I don't discredit it. I just know that what I'm trying to do is something slightly different. And being slightly different is kind of approaching that space of, um, I don't know, uncertainty for sure. Like, but you can also have the place like, is this the right thing to do? What's going to happen? So I'm going to say that in the context of my own life, the space that I walk on this like narrow line that sometimes I refer to as the abyss, sometimes it's just like the commitment to try. It is the attempt to do something. It's not foolhardy and it's not reckless attempts, but it's an attempt to do something because it's grounded in a deeper knowing and a sense of like yourself of what it is that you have to do. Whatever that is, that there's this like internal constitution that I think we need to have, which allows us to make certain choices and be bold in our decisions. And I'm not saying I have the recipe for this. In fact, I'm literally trying to suss it out right now and feel a little bit vulnerable, like doing it online in front of other people. But I will say that that is probably the biggest takeaway from Romancing the Revolution after our first gathering, that there is a lot of like vulnerability in inviting people into a process. I've been explicit. I've known that, but it doesn't mean it like doesn't still feel kind of vulnerable. Um so I think this, let me just say, this will be a little bit swirling as usual because there are multiple threads present for me right now of kind of what I wanted to talk about with this update. And I think that I'll start with Romancing the Revolution, but I have a feeling this is going to go in a lot of different directions, at least it could, through different types of relationships, parasocial relationships, maybe, and even like what it means to have real close friends. So let me just start by describing what happened in Romancing the Revolution, our very first week. As I was preparing for it, I've still been in the space of like reviewing and recovering a lot of old notes, old letters, old pages that I've made, and kind of reviewing some of the writing that I've done. I'm like finding all of these things that are from the past, whether that's in my physical notebooks or just like digital pages that I've made, and like reminiscing in a way, or more just kind of like wayfinding through these archives, like the things that exist that I just don't pay much attention to because there's not much organization around it. It's interesting what I can find. And I'm still in the space that I was 2 weeks ago of kind of relating back to my old thoughts from the past. But in Romancing the Revolution, something that I decided to do was to share for this first little batch of pages something about um, some early pages that I made in 2023. And they're ugly. They're like the first attempts that I made at making digital pages when I first got an iPad. And as silly as that is, I was like, what's an iPad? I don't know what those can do. And so getting new technology like really opened up a different methodology for me to write that facilitated what I wanted to do, which I've said and described as like whiteboards from teaching and notebook pages. If those are married together, you get these like digital pages that are sort of conceptual, visual, and spatially not linear. um, but when I first attempted even that to make those pages, they were not pretty. And there was one page I shared that had something like, my own process of like kind of dialoguing with myself where I end up writing about my frustrations. And like every time I try to write and be a certain kind of, I don't know, maybe philosopher or something, I end up revealing myself to be a very anxious writer. And all I can do is write about how bad the writing is going. So on this page, it looks terrible. I mean, it's not cute. It's messy. I do have things scratched out. It's like kind of scribbled in a way that is my raw, real handwriting when I'm not trying to make it look nice and extra legible. And I shared these couple of pages that have a sequence of my own thoughts about that, and even expressing like the frustration of, well, what if I'm trying this new thing, what is it that I need to do when it turns out to be trash, or I'm disappointed and I don't like how it looks. And in that page, I respond to myself and say, I guess you just have to keep trying and practice. See what happens when you approach this as a stylized repetition of X, which is really taking from sort of the offered definition of what performativity is. If you're going back to the, I don't know, Judith Butler's kind of work around performativity, the stylized repetition of X is how we become material. That's practice, that's discipline, that's how you learn how to play an instrument, that's how you build muscle, that's how you develop a craft and mastery. It's a stylized repetition of X in the style of whatever it is that you are becoming. So I put those pages side by side to some of the pages that I am working on now, which have a very like distinct feel, that has even been evolving just in the past like 6 or so months. And I wanted to show that. So that's kind of the entry point into what is really specific about how I'm trying to do this thing, romancing the revolution, of showing the process, and allowing for people to see what happens in a couple of years. Now, that might be super rudimentary and like kind of basic, but for me, it is also intriguing to share these like physical kind of documentations of a physical and a personal and a philosophical process that I've been going through, even around how I pursue my projects in the past couple of years. That's just one note from what came through with Romance and Revolution, in terms of like what I even noticed about sharing these pages, that demonstrating a developmental process in the way of like it's happening right now, um, I think is intriguing. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I'm intrigued and I hope other people could be intrigued by it. But also just to role model, like there is growth, even if we're in the middle of it. It maybe doesn't feel like it. Um, and I think understanding what to do when you're in the middle of a developmental process is one of those big questions that just keeps coming up. The I'm grateful to have people again to sort of reflect and share and to have our own thoughts or questions and experiences bounce off of each other to inform one another, which is really the benefit of doing um, engaged work with other people, being in conversation with others, even as loud and vibrant as our own voices inside our heads can be. And one person asked in response to one of my questions or one of my pages, like, how do you know when it is time to share? Because you are still learning, because there is always more to kind of define or refine. And I thought it was a really, interesting question to pose because one, I know that I've struggled with it for years and always have that kind of at the top of my mind of when is it appropriate to share, if the truth is that we're always learning and we're always gaining new information, especially if you're committed and dedicated to the process of being like a constant learner. We're never at a place where we have, I would say, a totality of what we know. Maybe this is like super Socratic, right? Of like when Socrates was the wisest man because he realized that the more he learned, he recognized that he knew nothing. And if we fall into silence or reticence because of the fact that we are realizing how much we have to learn or that we are learning, I think we will end up falling into the space of not speaking up, not telling the truth, not speaking truth to power. And those are the things we need to be doing. So I think that what has come to the fore for me in this past week, especially because of starting romancing the revolution, starting a new space, doing this that feels again like a radical first. It's like something I've never done exactly like this before. Other people haven't been in a space exactly like this before. And it will, even the space that we're in will evolve and change over time. So like to start at the beginning is a way to acknowledge, like, we'll be learning. And I think, I don't know, that this might be just like a little too loose of a share out as it is. But the process of learning, I think, is what we have to be responsible for. And I have put my phrases on this of share what you learn. And I think that there's, I guess, another strong undercurrent of what I'm doing, which is to share what you learn as something that you are learning, not necessarily something that you know. I guess I'm going to take this as like a little bit of a segue into something that has really been on my mind a lot of how I am approaching my own projects too and really thinking through this. And I have to also acknowledge, like, I need support in all of this as well. So another like little anecdote story that I want to share is that I actually thankfully reached out to a very close friend recently and had a super long conversation. It was 4 hours long, and I reached out and I said, "Hey, I need to process some things. Would you be willing to talk with me and offer some input?" And honestly, that is one of the biggest things that's happened this week for me, and it's left me with a lot to think about because of the significance of being in these close, intimate relationships with real, solid friends, and the connection that that provides, which is also so fruitful. So, to be completely candid, a lot of what I'm sharing, even right now, is being informed by a conversation I had with a friend. And you might be wondering, so who cares? Why are you telling us that? And the reason why I'm saying that is because what is holding space for like so much value and truth and meaning for me right now is the significance of our actual connections, of our actual relationships with people who we really love, who really know and love us, and that that's like the nature of our dynamic. I am sitting with deep appreciation for how absolutely necessary it is for us to be able to do our work in the world with the support and the mirror of people who really know us and whom for whom we can show up in that way too. Um, no, I was like, did I get lost in this? Maybe, but I know what I was going at is that in that conversation with my friend, one of the things that I was sharing was that, like, this feels so weird to me, and I can be filled with a lot of doubt. I've named that before, and I'm not shy about it, of, like, second guessing and wondering, like, who cares about this process? Who cares about being in this step by step with me? And, but I was telling my friend that, like, you know, I know that what is tried and true and what so many recommend is to offer the transformational process to say, I will guide you through your own process to help address this specific need. And in a marketing space, in a business space, we can say, I'm the kind of person who does fill in the blank for people who need help with fill in the blank so that your people can find you, so that your audience and your clients can find you. And then everybody knows what is supposed to be happening here. Um, I guess if I were to try to attempt to fit into some paradigm like that, I would say that I am trying to role model and demonstrate a process of thinking and reflecting that moves into a kind of action that allows us to become people who we want to be, the people who we need, based on our commitment to learning and transformation from the context, like against the backdrop of liberation. Again, where I started, always knowing that there's something bigger here than just our own projects of self actualization. We have, if we're, I think, aligned with greater values for the collective, then we have our own process that we pursue or our own projects that we try to, like, achieve and move forward that are serving something greater that is more than just like our own personal edification, if you will. So anyway, in talking with my friend, it became super clear where I was like, I know that this is a point of frustration and it's a point of commitment for me to not be promising something. Like, I'm not trying to run my work as a deliverable or a business package or a signature program that'll move you through how to do this stuff. That's not to say I don't intend and hope that people learn how to do things, but it's very different if we are like kind of in the process with each other. I guess I'm gonna stop like belaboring that point because I hope it's clear. But um it really is one of those things where it's like, I guess my people would be the people who want to learn and not just learn as in like good students, but learn through an additional layer of being in a certain kind of relationship of sharing because the process of learning happens through a specific kind of medium of sharing a process. Now, this was a big bulk of one of the bits of conversation I had with my friend because I had seen, of course, um, some post of some creator online on Instagram doing exactly what I'm talking about, of like how to coach people into being effective and impactful with their business. And the main point that caught my attention that had me reeling a little bit in my mind was this distinction that this creator made between oversharing and storytelling. And I get it. Honestly, I do. Let's just go the storytelling route because that's easy. Storytelling is a way to package some nugget of meaning or insight so that people can learn the meaning and make meaning of something in this delivery of a story. And a story has a beginning, a middle, of an end. It's engaging. It might like get some feelings going, but it's a different way to articulate the meaning that people can walk away with. Like, oh, now I understand that little nugget. Oversharing might be just a personal thing that you're just like unloading what's going on for you. You can be like, yeah, like what you're doing right now. But the oversharing doesn't necessarily have to land anywhere. And it's not exactly clear if it's directly intended to serve your, we'll just say audience at this point. So storytelling is like, hey, audience, I'm going to give you this story so that you can walk away with this understanding of a meaningful little takeaway. Oversharing can feel very ego-centric. It's self-serving to be like, I'm just getting this off and kind of dumping it on you. And maybe with gratitude, I'll say, thanks for receiving that. So my friend and I, we were wrestling through this because I kept saying like, well, am I just oversharing by inviting people into a messy process that's not so cut and dry and rigid? There's not a like concrete, clear structure for how to move through this process. And it is really largely motivated or like informed by my sharing first. And as we were going through that, I was like playing a little bit of devil's advocate, which is not a position I enjoy or like typically embody. But I was like, but what if I am oversharing? What if it is just I'm telling this thing? Maybe that's something that we also can practice because there's something important about like how to be there with each other in that. Or maybe it's appropriate for it to be messy. Maybe we don't always know the clear takeaway. And someone could say, well, you're wasting someone's time if that's what you're doing. And in the context of like maybe you could say like a transactional dynamic, maybe you are wasting someone's time if you can't say, let me efficiently offer you this thing that's going to help solve your problems. But I'm not promising to do that. Instead, again, I'm trying to invite people into a kind of process with me, which is to develop a certain kind of connection of relating in the process itself. This sounds like, ugh, God, how annoying might a philosopher be? But in the meta part of it, so much of what I'm trying to explore is like, what does it feel like to actually be in relationship with each other through what we learn? Now, um, I kind of want to make this the little segue to think about the depth and quality of our relationships because I'm not just processing out loud and oversharing, but I am sharing some things that I'm thinking about in real time. And what I'm thinking about in real time is a prominent theme that is not new to me, but I wonder so much about the nature of parasocial relationships and then sort of the degrees or the spectrum of relationship that allows for the kind of connection that I think is important. So if it's not obvious at this point, the kind of connection I'm talking about is that in which we can really learn something meaningful that helps us be in our lives in the way that is kind of this like development of us help becoming who we are and who we need. So I believe that relationships are so critical for us to be able to heal, to learn, to get insight and understand different truths. I think relationships are critical us for us to have mirrors in terms of understanding ourselves and each other more clearly and critically. I think theory is important because it is a sort of conduit for that mirroring, but so is literature and art and music and like essays that are just reporting information. There's all these different ways for us to get truth and insight that helps us see ourselves and each other more critically and clearly. And as I've said before, that's not just for the sake of knowing, it's to be able to locate ourselves more responsibly in the world so we can do something about all of this. Again, always in the context with a backdrop of like our vision and our values for who we want to be in the world and the world we want to create. But when I'm thinking about this dynamic of parasocial relationships all the way to we could say something which maybe feels utterly opposite of that, being the kind of close, intimate proximity of a deep relationship with like real personal knowing of one another. The parasocial side of things is where we have this sense of a kind of relationship or kind of connection with a person who, in the most extreme forms, literally doesn't even know that you exist. So typically, parasocial relationships are kind of described as these emotional bonds or an emotional investment in this sort of presumed connection that we can develop and form with and for other people who are so distant to us that they're unaware that we feel this way towards them. This happens a lot from like celebrity worship to just the way that we might become really attached and emotionally invested in like the people who we love, like our favorite musicians or something. And of course, I've explored this before. I think the seed of my thinking around this was my own kind of curiosity around like reading Nietzsche, which spans not just like airwaves, to see the concert or the performance or the speech of someone who I know is out there in the world doing great work that I follow or something. But from reading Nietzsche, that's like spanning a century plus of years and time and culture where we are so distant that of course he wouldn't know that I'm reading his stuff or that I feel any kind of way about it. That was always like the first initiation of my question of like, well, what can happen in terms of these relationships that we might form? In that case, like obviously strictly parasocial, um, that can also be incredibly transformative for us. Like the power of our connection or how we connect to other people. And I might put a caveat here and say the power of how we might connect to other people's work is something that I think is undeniably influential in our lives or experiences and how we know ourselves and who we become. So like let me just say the little interesting caveat or nuance around the piece with Nietzsche is that I liked to argue back in the day that that was actually on purpose and it wasn't so parasocial in the way that like Nietzsche had no idea. I actually was trying to make the point that like Nietzsche wanted that from people like me. He wrote specifically to people saying, I'm writing to you. It's not for everybody else who can't hear me, but I'm writing for you who can. And so I wasn't just trying to make it all about me and think that like, oh, I love Nietzsche because he's such a great philosopher and he's had such an impact on my life. There was something embedded in his philosophy and the style and the way that he was doing it that actually invited my thinking around this being a potentially parasocial relationship that was not so parasocial that it wasn't actually also reciprocal in some way across space and time and centuries. Now, that might be a little bit delusional. Fine. I'm okay with that. I can give you an example of how I know the limitations of like this other kind of experience we might have with someone's work. So, I will say that like I'm pretty vocal about this. One of my favorite musicians, I have many, but one of my favorite musicians is the artist Mind Chatter. And this has been the past few years. Like, I just love the music made by Mind Chatter. And what is so distinct about this profound inclination and affinity that I have to listen to Mind Chatter is that I am not at all confused about the fact that, like, I don't know the person, Bryce Connolly, who is the artist under, like, the musician alter ego of Mind Chatter. So the person, Bryce Connolly, I do not know, but I love his art and his music, which is presented to the world as Mind Chatter. There's an interesting thing here about, like, alter egos, but I'm not gonna get into that right now. What I love about the music, Mind Chatter's music, is that there's such actual, like, depth and what feels like real vulnerability of talking about even his own process. There's clearly a lot of stuff going on with, like, mental health and the way that one experiences was one's own interiority, and also how that translates into a creative process. So of course I'm gonna love that. Whatever's going on in terms of my brain and how it's wired, I think really resonates with whatever is going on in apparently Bryce Connolly's neural makeup to be creatively making art that not just, like, in terms of the way that it sounds really feels beautiful on my brain, but poetically, the lyrics and philosophically, the questions that are raised. And then personally, the sort of, like, candor and authenticity or vulnerability that's expressed in his music is something that I really appreciate. So while I Mind Chatter, love Mind Chatter, and lean on that music so heavily and appreciate it so much, I don't think that I have any kind of deep affinity for Bryce Connolly, the person. So this is a distinction I'm trying to make between, like, appreciating someone's work and knowing that their work can carry, but not confusing that in terms of the relationship that we actually have with the person. So I hope that, like, these two examples kind of show a slight difference, even with Nietzsche, who's long gone and dead, because duh. But there's a little bit more, like, madness here, thinking that maybe my connection that I feel towards Nietzsche is actually more reciprocal than even what I'm experiencing and what I assume, or even would want with, like, Bryce Connolly as the artist behind Mind Chatter's music, the Mind Chatter music stuff. Okay, so that's an interesting distinction, and it's something that I am curious about because when I'm doing my work, right, you might be like, what even is your work, Cori? At this point, it is seemingly processing and sharing and thinking out loud in real time. But it's not just that, like, because when I'm creating different spaces and sharing what I want to be sharing, these are also personal things to me. So maybe I guess, are we, like, kind of developing, like, quadrants or sections of overlap between the relationship, the person, the content, the method, the purpose? Because in some ways, the content is also a very separating factor in terms of our parasocial dynamics that we have with folks. For instance, let me say, I was just thinking of, like, Naomi Klein. I don't know if this is a great example, but maybe we don't even have to be so specific and name someone like Naomi Klein. I've talked about Naomi Klein's work though before, and in particular, like, Doppelganger is probably one of her more personal accounts of her work, which is the one that I am most recently connected to. So that one, the lines get a little bit blurry here because she is talking about her own experience. But let's just lean to somebody who's, like, strictly an essayist or a reporter or doing journalistic investigations. We can appreciate the work that people are doing and value work, like, that's super important work, to just be sharing out information, kind of the truth tellers through this journalistic approach. I'm going to summarize it that way. It's important for us to have people who can, like, tell the things as they are, whether that's theory. I'm seeing so much stuff right now about, like, people need to read theory and read communist texts to understand, like, what's going on here with capitalism. And those accounts are going to give very, like, concrete, that sounds abstract and maybe contradictory, but very concrete theory, you know? Where if it's just concepts and if it's just ideas and these are like the truths or the basics or the facts to give a foundation for how to make sense of the world, that information sharing is critical and we can get a lot from it. But it's not the relationship of the personal exchange. Like, we're not getting the information through our own personal stories. I think that this is what sets so much apart from in an epistemological, like, ugh, generalization. There are these ways of thinking about objective truths and the facts and how we know certain things that are separated from ourselves. This is just like what we've inherited from white Western patriarchal assumptions of objectivity and reason being the only way to access truth. So, in a way, you could say that my methodology is very clearly influenced from more feminist, embodied, and non Western ways of engaging in knowledge production and understanding how we come to understand the world. So, I've always loved that about Nietzsche, which I'm jumping here, but like poetics or the way that we express language, how we use our tools, and that is just as important for like what it is that we're trying to express. And sometimes the what it is that we're trying to express might be, yes, a story, it might be a personal account, or it might just be something that we are sharing um, in light of who we are. That is pushing, if you're following this, that is pushing us into a direction of something that goes beyond like even the parasocial dynamic of, oh, I love and respect this person's work and I feel so attached to them. But we can blur that even more when we say or understand that the person is actually sharing something about themselves. You know what I mean? Like, now it actually feels like we are getting to know this person, or what they're divulging is something that is real about who they are. So it's not just that we love their work in the abstract, theoretical, information sharing kind of way and appreciate their effort or their labor to deliver something to us, but people can tell a story and we think or we feel much more close and attached in some kind of way to them because of the stories that they've shared. So now we're like, we know them. Of course, I think that what is intriguing about this for me is that if we are telling true stories, then yeah, I don't know that we could deny that there are pieces of ourselves then, if we represent them as honestly as we can, to the extent of our like truth telling without being, deluding ourselves or others. Like you just say, like in good faith, if we share something of our story and we offer that up, then someone knows that piece of ourselves through the stories that we offer them. I think that that's true. It can still be, I won't say so much, it's not parasocial in the strictest terms any longer because like someone's literally offering this. So it's like the intention is there to share it and it is gifted in a way, but it is non reciprocal, right? So someone might be like, now I know this piece of the story of this person, but that person doesn't know you in the same kind of way, doesn't know your story. So this can happen via all sorts of platforms, via all sorts of projects. Um, Especially when people like, just write their own autobiography and say, these are the stories that I have, and now we read them. So our parasocial relationships, it's getting messy. But the ways that we connect with people might feel even stronger, even more like emotionally significant when it's not just adoration or respect for something someone does out in the world, but it's that we are holding parts of their stories now too. And that is the way that we feel connected to them. This gets dicey. Do you see or anticipate how and why? Because I guess that what I am always kind of exploring and questioning is, one, there's a question of safety in that. I mean, that might be a strong jump to something like feels really weighty. But there is something in terms of safety that I think about where, um, on the far side of things, there's like a stalkery element where people can become so obsessed or so convinced that the feelings that they have to a person based on what they feel like they know of them or their story motivates this kind of assumption of a connection that becomes and feels very real. Now, let me just say, I'm like interrupting myself. Hold on. But let me just say that, like, I also am giving a lot of space here for, like, the felt experiences of what feels real to someone, If we're in the space of, like, not invalidating people's experiences, then we can't say that what you feel is not true and is not real for you. So people might feel deeply connected and deeply invested in another person who there is this, like, distant relationship with, um and that's not to say that those feelings or those convictions are not, like, in one's body, very, very, very much felt and real. I say that that can trigger some concerns around safety and everything because, like, it's hard at times to keep track on what is real in the relational way, like, in the shared sense of truth and experience, what's real. Um, that I think is Im I mean, important to recognize, and maybe it's dangerous to play with, but I think it's, like, an intriguing question to explore, and I'm right there with it, like, wondering myself. So all of this, I'm kind of doing, like, I don't know that I've ever actually given such a large summary of this, sort of category of my thinking around what intimacy is, what relationships look like, the parasocial dynamics. I've hinted at a lot of it. Um, and it's like it's complex. So actually, let me add one more dimension into this, another angle of thinking about the quality and nature of our relationships. Because there's this other slice of experience that I think about a lot and will continue to reference. So might as well go into it. The slice of experience is like, what about those encounters with people where they are real? They are mutual in the sense that, like, let's just say, real person to person conversation. That doesn't have to be like in the flesh, it could also be digital or virtually. To say that, well, we can actually have a meeting of people, even in a like mediated way, digitally or virtually. But let's just assume that, like, there was a conversation or a brief moment of interaction in the span of one's life where this happened between two people. And what I always refer to these as like the moments that mattered. So that's my little coded language here. But let's just say there was this interaction or a moment that mattered that was very real. People are present to each other, having this kind of exchange. And that significant exchange is something that carries through meaningfully in your life. That doesn't mean that there's this depth of relationship that facilitated that, and it wasn't even necessary for it, and it didn't even have to continue. Like, what happened didn't have to become the impetus for some now long and lengthy, meaningfully extended relationship of ongoing connection. That doesn't even have to be the case. So when I talk about, like, professors or teachers or seeks to the, like, little moments that matter, these little conversations. I play these comments that people have said to me or things that I have picked up, these little tiny pearls of something. They kind of become like the flashcards of how I make sense of the world or what has become my way of understanding things. So it could be something that someone said at a talk, just that one little thing, that ping that resonated so much. I wrote it down and that became like the phrasing that really stuck with me. That really happened. And maybe it was a real conversation and a real connection. So it's not just like the other person's not aware of it. But that doesn't mean that it has the substance of the depth of relationship, but the substance or the meaning of what happened still resonates. I think about this a lot because there are people in my life who have had these like momentary interactions or really brief conversations that have become sort of, if I have a so visual today. If I have like a stadium of all these people who are the influencers of my thought, like they all have a little place here, and I know what they said, and I know what it looked like when they said it, and I know where we were. I think it's really fascinating, and this kind of goes back to some of the themes from a couple of weeks ago, the last update. But I think it's really fascinating to also recognize that as significant as that moment or that conversation or the thing that they said was, like for me, for instance, that person, even though they were there and it really happened, we were together in the same moment of time in that exchange, they might not have the same recollection of it, or maybe it wasn't so impactful for them. Um, so I think that that's important too, to recognize that the difference of our experiences can still exist within the meaning of a connection, um, or that we what we make meaningful about a connection in our lives with someone. I think right now, if we were to like try to put this into physical form, we're looking at like a 5 or 6-sided die of all these different facets of the ways of connecting. And all of this has just been a long-winded sort of way to get back to something that is really what I'm holding right now personally, because of the, like, reflections that I've been wading through. The questions that I've had for the past couple of weeks have felt really significant around my own vulnerability and my own, um, I don't know, willingness to kind of put things out there. I'll just cut to the chase and say, like, I'm really glad that I was able to have a conversation with a friend, a very close friend who I know knows me, who I love deeply, and with whom there are years of us living and learning and growing and sharing and supporting and like being with each other. So, as much as I talk about the parasocial relationships, like generalized, um, and all the ways that something that feels important or meaningful and special can also happen in the context of a connection that is like, you might say, well, loose, light. There is also this other form of connection that is what I'm sitting with right now with deep appreciation, and I never want to undermine. It's kind of actually like the heart and soul of my work is how close we can really be with each other. And and I guess I'm struck right now because of how utterly and unequivocally important it is for us to have relationships like that in our lives. That happens, it can be friends, it could be family, it could be partners, I don't know, maybe even some of your colleagues. Like, I don't really care so much like designation of the relationship as long as it happens. And so, when I'm thinking about like romancing the revolution or something, I'm still sitting with, like, what it means to romance the revolution, but I know that there's this air and an energy around romancing that carries, the want, like, the desire and the will to show up as openly and generously and, like, effusively as possible, and those are the kinds of connections that I think become the most powerful, the most potent, and probably, actually, if we're tracking threads here, I believe that this is what Audre Lorde was talking about in the uses of the erotic. That this is the level of depth and sharing that actually matters. And I know that for many people, especially as the timelines continue to unfold, I know I hear constantly from folks that it's very difficult for us to connect with other people on this level, or that people are feeling lonely and isolated and don't really have people in their lives with whom they can be that real or feel that seen. And I want to make sure that always noting like this is a reciprocal dynamic. So I wonder so much about our capacities to really show up for one another, to really be honest enough with ourselves and each other to like facilitate that kind of intimate connection with depth. Um, and excuse me. I think that there are a lot of reasons that aren't just our personal limitations, or like maybe we haven't done enough work to have the capacity to show up for each other. I think that structurally, the context and the conditions of our lives really exacerbate the difficulties in connecting with one another. That is largely, I would say, structurally by design to keep people isolated, and afraid, or just so exhausted that we don't even have the time, space, and capacity to connect, to really cultivate these kinds of bonds. And, I mean, we're going on almost like 15 years ago now. The stuff that I was trying to explore through feminist friendship as a practice and a theoretical concept was about how powerful and important it is for us to be able to relate to each other across differences at that depth of intimacy and understanding too. Yes, it's important in its own right, but I keep trying to remind that it's never just for the sake of that. Like, in a context where people are disconnected, then yes, it actually is pretty powerful to just forge and nurture these kinds of deeper connections. But if we go beyond that, the real import here is that it's through those depths of connection that I think we can actually now do bigger, more important, more significant, substantial work of like really changing things. A way to summarize that would be to say that, like, if we can't trust each other enough, um, or we don't have the conditions of trust, then it might be harder for us to know how to reach out and how to organize. I'm going to immediately put a caveat on that too, which is to say that I also think it's very possible for us to trust each other in a political organizing kind of way without the depth of relationship. Like, we need that. We need to just be people who can show up and do the things together. And the fact that we're showing up and doing the things, and we kind of have a shared understanding of what that means, what that looks like, what that requires of us, I think is a very important fundamental basis for us to have politically effective connections and networks too. So I'm even questioning like the it's all very complex. Multiple truths. We can hold multiple things at once. That yes, I am sitting so much with how important it is for us to have this depth of intimacy and connection and knowing of one another and being able to be in that space because we need it. I mean, I needed it this past week. And I am fortunate that I was able to have like conversations with multiple friends. I'm just kind of harping on one right now as an example, but I am grateful for how many people in my life I feel like I have that depth of knowing and reciprocity and care. And in order for us to be effective politically, we don't have to only have that. I think we can also mobilize and move with each other, from a from more of like a aligned visions and values. Like, we are trying to do the same thing. I don't even need to know you that deep to know that if we're on the same team here, then we show up for each other. Here's your assist. Why am I doing sports metaphors? You get the point. Um, I think we need that too. But that actually is a matter of like, are we capable of showing up trustworthy enough for even our strangers or the people with whom we are in movement with? Do we know how to show up for each other if we don't have that depth of connection? That I think is an important question, something to practice, something to develop. And also, I know that there's this space in our lives where we need also to feel the support, like the deep, deep, deep love, knowing and support with one another to be able to hold each other through the hardest of things, even if that's just navigating through the daily doubts and challenges and hurdles, but also especially through the long term hardships and struggle, um, of trying to build a better world. So, with all of this, I think I I think that might be all that I'm gonna say now. I didn't fully anticipate that, but like, um, I know that there is something important here about being able to connect with people with whom we have a shared sense of the world and our purpose in it, or what we're trying to do together. I think that there's a danger here of just like connecting for the sake of connecting. I hope that's like becoming very clear. I'm not even actually sure if I'm a huge proponent of like connecting with people um who don't have similar worldviews, you know? Maybe that's important if we're trying to like persuade or influence people to like join a movement. Then yeah, talking to people who aren't fully aligned is definitely a strategy. But when it comes to like the kind of work to sustain ourselves, I mean, I guess I lean more into the camp of like, I don't know how you could be really close, intimate partners with someone whose worldview is diametrically opposed to yours. I just don't think that that is synergistic enough to have the kind of depth of support and alignment that actually creates that bubble of what I started with, of saying like making the conditions for us to be able to experience something different with each other, even if it's in a limited, relatively small local context of like our own lives and our own relationships. Um, but I suppose that throughout all of what I've just said, that is still one of the takeaways, one of the hopes that we can create the spaces for us to actually experience and embody the values and the practices that we are so desperately in need of and hopefully wholeheartedly are committed to nurturing and fostering and creating in the world. Um, that is what Liberation is Local was all about. That is what I think is the benefit of becoming really clear on what liberation looks and feels like, is so that we can do it, so that we can be it and practice it in all the ways that we have the opportunity to in our everyday lives right where we are. And to like put a little bow around this share, um, that is also true in our relationships, the ways that we connect. I think there's always the challenge and the opportunity for us to show up with the best of our ability in the way that we really want to, that we're committed to. There's like humility and integrity and on the line in terms of alignment. But through that practice, what is most powerful and potent is that it actually opens up to the reality that this is possible and we're capable of doing it, even on a small scale, which to me is encouraging because I believe that if you follow any kind of fractal strategy, what we have on the smallest scales, if we make that real, so real that is like unwavering, and we know it and we live it and we can be it and we can do it. It's not unfamiliar and it's not distant and it's not abstract, but it's really concrete, like in us, in our everydayness. That is the tiniest, tiniest little building block of making it possible and bigger on the largest scale imaginable. So I'll end with this by expressing so much gratitude always to, in particular, the people in my life who have been those who offered a tiny little pearl of wisdom or a little insight that was a moment that mattered. And the people who also engage with my work from a distance, who feel that the depth of their own meaningful connection to that, even if I don't know who you are. Um, Thank you for engaging and making it meaningful for you. I think that that is critical and crucial work as well. And of course, I have so much gratitude for all of my loved ones and friends and the people in my life who do so much work to hold a lot of space for me in the way that they nurture and support my own process too. So, you know, thinking about, I guess this can be romancing the revolution, but it for sure aligns with the spirit of developing an epistemology of intimacy and truth as a relationship. Yeah, I think I think there's something to that. I'm gonna wrap up this update with that, and, if you want to join in on the process of romancing the revolution or just follow along, you can. You can find more information about that in a lot of places. Probably the easiest hub right now is my website, CoriWong.com, and then you can link to that, Romancing the Revolution, and all the other places where it is. But in the meantime, subscribing on Substack is great, and following along wherever I am is very much appreciated, and all of your support too. I'm so so grateful for. So thank you for being on this journey with me or being part of the process. And more importantly, thank you for being in your own process. And if there's anything that I can do that informs your process, that honestly, that is the goal. That is the point here. But I can't tell you what that is. That's your truth and your meaning making to do. So thanks for putting in the effort and the will to make it happen. And I'll be back soon.